All right, welcome to another session of Authentic Selling Live. We've got Kevin today, Kevin Warner. He's the founder and CEO over at Leadium. Before we jump into what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about channels and messaging for outbound, which Kevin is more than qualified to talk about. But Kevin, why don't you give folks just a little bit of background on yourself and why you've been so obsessed with outbound for some time now?
Yeah, I mean, the quick and dirty is we have been in the sales development outsourcing agency world for what is coming up 9 or 10 years since 2014, before outreach was outreach, when Sales Loft was still known as Cadence, Discover or still existed. Before sales technology really blew up. Prior to kind of getting into sales, I was always on the product development side back in 11, 12, 13, when app development was a huge craze and driver of new products. And when I was in the product development side, what you learn very quickly after going through one or two companies that burned through $20 million in funding and ended up closing is, who cares what your product is? Who cares how good it is if you have no sales and no revenue to drive kind of the continual um, uh, company? And so kind of pivoted into sales, got very fortunate in creating one of the early on sales agencies. And that's just what we've been doing for what seems like a crazy amount of time now in 8 or 9 years.
What do you think have been some of the biggest changes on outbound, just in general, that you've seen from when you first got into the industry to now? Just like big changes that you've seen take place of what's working.
Yeah, it's really interesting now that you've been in it for so long that cyclical models really do exist. And I think when you're growing up and you're just out of college, you just don't have enough experience to see, hey, what was in trend was out of trend, comes back into trend. And only until you get the experience do you see that really true. In 2014, 15, 16, the sales development world was, all about growth hacking. It's how do you make the most from the least? There's not a lot of technologies that plug and played into integrations with each other. No, sales or outreach didn't have any integrations for the first year. So how do you maximize that while still finding data? And the approach for outbound became very programmatic because it had to be very programmatic. What happened was in 17, 18, 19, there was a shift to a people driven, very account based model. That's where the rise of the Sendosos came into the world. And it's driven by an SDR function. So that's really where you saw the SDR itself blow up, that role. And it became an activity centric. You have to have somebody who can email, phone, LinkedIn, across channel. What we're seeing now is kind of the counter side that, and we're going back to programmatic. How are we using channels most effectively? And how are we using messaging within those channels most effectively? And if you follow programmatic ads and how you use technology to execute the programmatic ads and segmentation and personalization, optimizing in real time with data, that's kind of where we see things now, since kind of the mid part of 2022.
Yeah, and I'm just curious. Hold on, I just want to make sure that we are okay. Yeah, we are live here. Those of you that are just joining us right now, this is an authentic selling live session brought to you by Humantic. Today, we're talking with Kevin Warner from Leadium. We're talking about targeting and messaging, or channels and messaging for outbound. And we're going to be taking questions as you have them. So go ahead and drop those questions in the chat. This is part one of a two-part series. So we'll also be wrapping this, letting you know what to expect for the session that we're doing with Kevin tomorrow as well. So we kind of just jumped in here. But the thing that I want to talk about, Kevin, is leveraging different channels, right?
Yeah.
People often talk about omni-channel, use all the channels, but I want to get your take on really identifying what channels are right for specific targets or specific people, or how you can optimize to not treat every prospect the same on every channel.
Yeah, that's big. So every channel works, right? You have those who, obviously love cold calling. So is cold calling dead? Is it not dead? You have those who love email and push email. That's a lot of like fodder for what do you have more experience in and what are you more comfortable in. What you really see is, hey, email, phone, and LinkedIn, all three channels work. Are they equal conversion rates? No. I think what you're finding is the human side of sales is as alive now than it's ever been. And what that means is there's a prospect that you're prospecting to. That person is an individual. And if you think outside of their work, they consume media differently. Media in this terms could be email versus phone calls versus LinkedIn, even over to the social side. Do they consume Instagram the same way as TikTok, is the same way as Facebook? So it's modeling the marketing very closely to what you see in email, phone, and LinkedIn. So all three channels are effective, but your end user might not be using the channel the same way across the board. So this is where you really have to dial into segmentation, understand the micro analytics of conversion of engagement channels to say, hey, if Collin is a heavy user of LinkedIn, meaning making multiple posts a month, connecting with X amount, have certain amount of followers, is liking and commenting on other people's posts, most likely LinkedIn is Collin's preferred communication channel. So I should preface, engagements there when I'm prospecting versus email or phone call, which maybe he'll never pick up a phone call because he's not a phone call answerer. So you're seeing that the human side of the prospect really depicts on how you build out your engagements across email, phone, and LinkedIn. A problem is you never quite know. So what you really have to do on the strategy side as a company is start to segment your prospects as much as possible so that you'll start to see those analytics probably get paired out. And that's everything. Age group. So yes, I understand you're targeting the same personas, but does age actually have a relevance to the channel you should be engaging? Yes, it most likely does. If that prospect is over 50 years old, maybe they are phone call pickers upper. If your persona, a VP of marketing happens to be 32 or 33, maybe they're not going to answer the phone because they're more on LinkedIn. So you're seeing that even within vertical segmentations, which a lot of people focus a lot of their campaign strategies around, you have to dig into multiple more layers of segments to really see where the data is telling you to focus on.
Yeah. Wow. All right. There's a lot to unpack there. So the first thing I want to start with is, this idea that um, certain people, that you should be segmenting your list based on preferred, channels, right? So, for example, if they're, if they're in a older, age bracket, you might have more phone steps in
Yeah.
there, right? If they're active on social, then you might have, more, LinkedIn steps there, engaging, commenting, sending them DMs, videos, in the DMs, voice messages, you name it. So how does somebody strategically optimize their list for channels? And then in some cases, if they're just not sure, does that go into a default sequence? How many different, sequences here would you recommend to have your list fully optimized based on what assumptions you have for each channel to perform best?
Yeah, assumptions are key, especially if you're early days on the strategy, you just don't have metrics that back up one thought process or another. You have to really lead with an assumptive based model. Um, the difficulty becomes understanding your market. So if you're targeting commercial real estate agents, hey, inherently this might adjust the channels that they prioritize just because of the nature of that persona who's there, versus if you're going after recently funded Series A like tech companies with less than 100 employees. That's a very different market. So you're learning very quickly, just on the high level verticals that you're targeting and the product that you're targeting, on how to focus on segmentation first. Um, but I think the key is still, you have to have a benchmark. So the way I think every company should be thinking about it, which is good and bad, is a programmatic approach. And by programmatic, I mean, hey, you can't depend on an ace SDR that you hired who just has a huge personality on LinkedIn and can drive. It's just that like home run hitter. right? Because they're few and far between, and you'll get it wrong more than you get those hires right. When you're thinking about an acquisition channel like outbound and you're analyzing email, phone, and LinkedIn, and which message at the right time on which channel, that's a programmatic approach. And by making the assumptions for your verticals, you can start to build it out. The problem with it is you have to have benchmark analytics to start with. So if I go with evergreen messaging, who cares how many layers of segmentation and customization and personalization and using Humantic or using this or using ChatGPT you layer on? If you can't analyze, is it increasing or decreasing the lift of that program? So you always have to start with a benchmark and then strategically start to layer on additional strategies on top of it. The biggest problem is that takes time. And what a lot of sales orgs don't know is they don't really know what's working and
Mm.
what's really driving the results. And they're not willing to necessarily pay for the investment to figure it out. They need appointments, and they need appointments now.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So couple things that stand out to me there based on that is one, you got to start with sort of a baseline,
Yeah.
right? And then start to optimize with things like channel optimization, personality personalization, all of these additional things that you can add. If you don't have a baseline, you can't try all of these things at once because you just won't know what's working or if you're even getting a lift at all,
Right.
right? And then the other thing that you mentioned was, not relying on, necessarily, an SDR that, is crushing it as the baseline, right? And so it kind of, this is something that I know you and I have talked about before is having specialty reps, right? Having reps, not treating all SDRs the same, right? We're talking about
Right.
prospects that are maybe going to convert better on specific channels, right? So maybe they're active on LinkedIn, you're going to get better conversion there. Maybe they're in an older, demographic, so maybe phone's going to convert better. But what we haven't talked about is certain SDRs being doing better on specific channels. What are your thoughts around that? Like, do you expect an SDR to be great on LinkedIn and posting content and engaging and building relationships and
Yeah.
getting conversions there, being great at sending videos, being great at cold calling, being great at crafting, killer messages that get replies?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we have obviously at Ledium, we're in this weird world of outsourcing and making the most of it and creating specialized roles. If you go to a design agency, it's the same function. You have a back end engineer, a front end engineer, back end developer, like it's the whole same specialized function to deliver on a single project. That's the same way we've seen the most success come to outbound. It is very hard to hire. And that is inherently the biggest risk to an organization. And I think you've seen a lot of turnover in the SDR position over the last year, especially. And that's one, very hard to measure ROI of an SDR, especially when pipeline's not being created. Of course, not everything's an SDR's fault for lack of performance. But at the same time, it's a lot of risk. As an organization, you have the average SDR, according to the Bridge Group, I think in the last year or two is 12 to 13 months before they leave you. It takes 3 months to ramp up. That doesn't take into account how many people do you hire who just aren't good SDRs. And that's months that have to get it added into the entire, equation of even when you have a good rep. So you're only looking at a couple months of productivity from an individual rep before they move on. And so what you're finding is that the reps are also the idea that you can be good at email, phone, and LinkedIn is fewer and far between. Those are three unique channels. I equate a lot of things to the digital world. TikTok advertising and Instagram advertising are very unique advertising channels, different structures, different audiences, different engagement types. And it's not to say that you can't get the experience to be good at all of them. It's just rarer and it takes longer to build that experience. And if you're back tailing it onto the idea that you're only at a company for 12 to 13 months, it's hard to maximize your output during that period. So what we've seen is just people who like to call are very good callers. A lot of people in my network, you might immediately think of like a Ryan Research type of person. You just love calling. And that's what you're great at. Your skill set lends itself to calling. Same with email. Email is very unique. You think about the guys at Lavender who all day, every day specialize in email. That is a unique skill as well. LinkedIn is that's not even really LinkedIn selling. That's becoming a persona almost to really become effective, engaging with your network, having that social presence and social awareness. That's very rare as well. And so to be good at all three of those, very difficult. And not only be good at all three of them, but to do them at the same time throughout the day, to be able to go from call to email to LinkedIn to call to email to LinkedIn, throughout a day is very hard. Where you find great skill is in specializing it. Know that there's a team who's executing on a project, an emailer who can specialize in that, a call team who can specialize in that, and working together to drive really the engagements where prospects want to be engaged with anyway. What I mean by that is if somebody answers the phone, that's a rare occasion. If you're getting a 10% connect rate, that's fantastic. If I'm getting 10%, 10 of every 100 calls somebody's answering, I want that on with my best phone call person, not somebody who just learned how to be an SDR 3 months ago. Because the amount of time and dollars it takes to get direct dials and this and that, we better be putting our best foot forward. So specialized roles are kind of leading the way. Agencies have been doing them for years. What we're seeing now is, hey, companies are starting to pick up on that same idea.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think it's a tall order for orgs to shift to this type of
Yeah.
thinking. Um, but it makes sense. I mean, even if you look at, how they make things in a factory, right? It's an
Yeah.
assembly line. Each person has a very specific role in, completing whatever it is they're building, right? And they get really good at that one thing because that's all they do. Now, is that boring? Yeah, probably. But
Well,
would you rather be bored and be great at your job and be driving results, or trying to be good at everything and really just not being that good at anything?
I'll say one of the most interesting takeaways, especially with a lot of our clients over the last few years, are those who do have SDR teams or some sort of SDR presence internally, but who understand that the programmatic approach, that the specialized research is a flow from technology and optimizations, and a team who's strategizing and measuring is, hey, if you do have those players in-house, there is a need for that, to have the A players in-house driving a need. But why do companies engage marketing agencies or design agencies? You could be Apple engages, Red Bull is notorious for, engaging design and marketing agencies worldwide, even though they have an in-house team. Well, why is it? Well, a design agency inherently allows you at a more affordable cost access strategists, a different thought process, a different way to think and strategize out of the box that maybe your team can't see. A way to access new technologies that you might not have to eat the cost on, a way to get specialized resources, wireframe designers, back end designers, front end designers, back end engineers, front end engineers, experts when it comes to IT. You get that whole ecosystem without needing to hire it, even though you do have key pieces inside. So I think that kind of lends itself to why you're seeing more and more agencies and consultants start to become, outsourced options for companies.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So, a couple questions. Dylan was asking if we have a recording. Yes, we will. We will have a recording that will be live on the YouTube channel. We usually get those up fairly quickly. And then we got another question here. If you're good at one channel and mediocre at others, do you recommend going big on that one channel, or focusing less on the others?
Yeah, if you're asking me, it's an interesting one. And I think a lot of it comes down to the company you're hired at. Because sadly, I think a lot of companies still exist in an activity centric mindset, not an ROI centric mindset for the SDR function. So your value on an org is how much activity you're doing, and not necessarily how much revenue and ROI you're driving that organization. So the unfortunate part is, hey, that question will largely dependent on who's your sales leadership. If you are really good at cold calling and you're booking revenue from cold calling, the thought would be, it doesn't matter. Would I like you to push your limits? You're still an FTE or a full-time employee. So my value is still maximizing your entire skill set. So I do want you to push and maybe learn how to do that, because I do want you to be a well-rounded rep, but I would be doing the majority of your time on the channel you're more you're better in, because that's probably what's leading to the results. And most sales orgs should be measuring based on results and not necessarily activity. But that's also a hard question, because I know, Collin, you are, and we're in some channels where if you don't do X calls, regardless of appointments booked, then you get put on PIP. And that's an unfortunate reality.
Yeah. I mean, it is a tough question, but I think my thoughts are, you know, what defines being good on a specific channel, right?
Yeah, that's
Because
true.
you can't say, hey, I'm booking most of my meetings on phone, I should just only call and do nothing else. Because a lot of times your success on phone could be because it's now a warm call, because you connected with them on LinkedIn, you engaged with them,
Yeah.
you sent them a video and there's some familiarity. They remember seeing your email, but they just didn't reply, right? So there's just a lot of variables to say you can't necessarily go all in on one. But I think that at the very, it depends also, you got to have enough data to show like that you're better at one specific channel, right? I've
And I,
seen I've seen people go all in on one channel, and that can go terribly wrong. But from a sales leadership standpoint, which is a whole nother can of worms that we definitely don't have time to get into. Yeah, I mean, basing success on activity is ridiculous. I think that if people on your team can drive results, and if that means spending more time on one channel versus others, then you should absolutely allow for that, right? I mean, if it takes you 50 activities or 10 activities to get to, 2 meetings, why would you care, right? Then they can spend more time on other things and drive more results, where you're actually putting handcuffs on them if you're saying no, but you got to put all these activities in.
yeah, I mean, to end on that point, it was channel and messaging super important. Cross channel, you're playing again in today's market. We talk about programmatic a lot at Leadium. We think that there used to be, Collin, you might know this. There used to be this conversation in 2015, 16, 17. You couldn't get on a podcast or anything without, does sales development live in marketing or sales, or in between marketing or sales, and in between. And at the time it was maybe in between, but it leads to sales. I think
Yeah.
it's counter that to now. I think it's market. It should be led in marketing, only because marketing is set up for this programmatic mindset a lot of times, where it's, hey, what are we doing? What are we measuring? What are we trying to achieve? Does this have revenue attributed to it?
Yeah.
Sales doesn't have that mindset. Should it live in sales? Yes. But if sales is living in this activity world where we measure your effectiveness based on how many activities you've done, it shouldn't live there. And marketing lives in a programmatic world where everything's ROI driven. And to my point on this, whether you should be good in one, should I double down in one? The bigger conversation companies need to have, and SDRs need to have, and sales leaders need to have is, what do I need to achieve? So if I'm an SDR coming into a job, is my quota 12 appointments? Let's say it's yes, right? Because everyone's getting a quota. Great. If I hit 12 appointments on the 13th of the month, can I take the next 2 weeks off? Because that was my quota. I hit it. And I don't care if I hit it on email, on phone, LinkedIn, email, phone, and LinkedIn. I drove the goal for the company, and I'm taking the next 2 weeks off. The answer as a company should be yes, because, hey, that's what we hired you for. That's our ROI. So if you can just set 14 appointments a month every month with our goal, then yeah, take the 2 weeks off. It's not, though. They'll say, no, do more. Do more. So the world of ROI and how are you evaluating, that's where it's unfortunate, where you can't just put all of your cards in one channel. You do have to, if you are an FTE, you do have to learn how to play each of them. But it goes back to understanding the human side of your prospect, and that'll show you where you should prioritize time for each individual prospect versus your skill set.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we have about 6 minutes left, and we've talked a lot about channel and segmentation, and from prospects perspective of what prospects maybe are going to convert better on specific channels. We've talked a lot about even now, SDRs and BDRs, and them optimizing on specific channels and things like that. But let's talk about messaging. Let's talk about I think a large problem is people don't know how to properly message on each channel, right? And some of that could be maybe they're stronger and more confident on specific, like maybe they're very comfortable on social, maybe they're confident on phone, maybe they struggle with email. But what is your thoughts around messaging on these different channels?
Messaging will forever be a debate depending on who's kind of leading in that debate around how do you personalize at scale, this or that. Um, Messaging on each channel, one is each channel should be unique. I think we all agree we hate when you get a LinkedIn connection and immediately after you get a 4-paragraph email. Like, that's not how you use LinkedIn. That's not understanding the channel and how the communication flow works within that. So you inherently, for messaging, have to understand the uniqueness of each channel or engagement channel.
Yeah.
When it comes to messaging, what we have found to be the best at conversions is that segmentation. So if I don't need to write a hyper personalized email. I'm sorry, you don't need it. Here's the truth of the matter is we're all professionals. We have a job that we have to do for the company we're hired at. We have problems that need to solve in order to do those jobs. If there's a solution, a product, a something that can help solve a problem that I have today and make me do that job or accomplish something that the company is trying to fix or focus on, then I'm inherently going to find out more information about it. So we can assume that there's an inherent need. Now, of course, you have to have a product that people care about. Commodities are much harder, so that's where you go into relationship-based selling. But if you have a product that's solving a problem, that's solution one. Now it becomes, how well did you segment it and build messaging to that segmentation? And then once you can do that, you can layer on personality driven, from the humantic standpoint, which, Medium utilizes at scale now as well, is start to take the initial message that you crafted for that market segment and then tailor it to the individual personality trait. Again, you're still leading with a lot of assumptions, but you're segmenting your market down as much as possible. I'll make one equation before you fill in a couple points. If you take an Instagram ad, I always do this during our sales call. Humantic and Nike, the same exact ad format. The format of the ad does not change. It's an Instagram ad. That's the same when it comes to email, phone, and LinkedIn. No matter what company you are in the world, you're playing with the same format. What Nike might be able to do well better than Humantic is understand what 18 to 24-year-olds in Southern California like if they've expressed interest in basketball. They know the exact messaging copy, the graphic, the byline, the call to action to present that very small, segment of their market. And then they can change it for the next one and the next one. Whereas a lot of companies don't know that yet. And so you still have to bucket as much as possible, layer on into the individual in the programmatic ad side. If you've been to the Nike website, if you purchase something, they can customize it for you. If I know that you're a type A personality or this or that, I can customize the messaging for how you speak and how you engage with words. But that's the best approach to messaging. Segment as much as possible. Assume that the market segments that you're targeting all share the same problem, which they should if you're segmenting really well. Talk to that problem and then layer on for the individual, and then know that each format for each channel is going to be different.
So, the thing that stood out to me the most, which I love there, is personalizing the message to the person, right? Knowing, there's lots of data that you can get on people, and obviously, with the type of information that we provide people, the personality, you can get really specific to personalizing that message across all channels based on any research that you've done, personalization, relevance on the problem, and then even delivering it, in the communication style of that person to optimize for performance. We got a few questions here that I want to get to. So Sean was asking, Kevin, what's your thoughts on AI and sales engagement prospecting for assisting reps as opposed to the idea of replacing reps?
I think the idea of replacing reps has already been in play for a year or 2 year prior to AI. And I think that's just as companies start to utilize technology, not necessarily AI, but we're talking about how we can scale activity, how if we actually segment, build personalized messaging, understand the changes between each channel, understand the, humantic personality side of it. So the replacement of SDRs has been a slow roll already. A lot of layoffs in the SDR function. I'll tell you right now, if you're adding revenue to a company, you don't necessarily get caught up in a lot of layoffs. If there's a clear, measurable value being driven to a company, it's hard to lay someone off. I run a company, Collin, you've run companies. That's just true. I see AI really showing its head is the change from an SDR function driving top of funnel to campaign manager function. So are SDRs now being converted into campaign strategists and campaign managers, where, hey, we are building very programmatic campaigns cross channel using AI to dial in our messaging, dial in the segmentation across those different channels. And now, am I measuring the effectiveness of those campaigns and making optimizations in real time? That is where I see most change being made when it comes to AI.
Yeah. And I mean, I love that you always use the marketing examples too, right? With the Nike ad and Instagram versus TikTok. I mean, our founder, Emma Preet, even did a master class with Dr. Michael Kosiniski. And, just like one simple data point on social of like people, and this was tested, I think, on Facebook specifically, like one like of a specific thing, which drove changes in how the ads were delivered. And this was like straight to a buy conversion, increased by like over 100% based
Right.
on changing the messaging to the personality of that person based on one social action.
Yeah. I mean, the two worlds are so closely linked now, and I think more and more companies are. It's an impression. Outbound is an impression game. Believe it, and people say it's a numbers game. Yes, it's a numbers game because it's an impressions game. The more people who can see your value propositions can engage with it. But what you're really trying to hone in is, are we presenting what we do in a convertible way? Are we leading them to the next step? And if you think about like a digital ad, did they click? Did they add to their cart? Did they get to the checkout sign? Did they end up checking out? Each one of those steps is measured. And now we're starting to measure that when it comes to outbound as well. And that journey or that flow has to be dialed in. And that's where that, cross channel. Why do you need email, phone, and LinkedIn? Because each one of those is a different type of impression. It's the same reason a company cookies you and you went to Nike and suddenly you're on Facebook getting Nike ads. You think your phone's listening to you and now you're getting Instagram ads. They are looking for those impressions across channels to get to the point where do you convert? I convert on Instagram ads. I'll never convert on a TikTok ad. So they're trying to hit where that end user is actually going to, drive the conversion. And you're seeing that mirrored so much in outbound.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, thank you so much. Great session. Thanks to everybody who joined today. We're going to be back again tomorrow, same time, 9 a.m. PST. The link is in the comments. And we're going to be talking about mailing your target persona. So it's going to be a continuation on messaging. The messaging part here is a big component. And we're going to be continuing to pick Kevin's brain about this tomorrow. Kevin, how many different campaigns have you been a part of creating the messaging for in your time of outbound sales?
Oh, we're well over 1,000 companies. So well over 1,000 companies, and that's cross industries. Everything from DNA sequencing in big pharma to selling POS systems at restaurants, which give you a strange perspective of, hey, you really have to. It's the same format. I'll tell you, DNA sequencing versus POS to restaurants. We're dealing with the same things as how do I just write one email that connects with one person?
Yeah. Awesome. Appreciate everybody who joined today. Hopefully, we will see you tomorrow, 9 a.m. PST, again with Kevin from Leadium.